Good morning, dear friends and family. Just 2 days after my wedding, my mother-in-law laid down the law. I had to pay $7,500 a month for household expenses, or get out. I just smirked, then bought the $4 million mansion right across the street, turning her face purple with rage. My name is Chloe Hayes, and I'm 34 years old. Just 2 days ago, I was in a white wedding gown, standing beside the man I believed would build a peaceful home with me. Yet, by noon on the second day after the wedding, with the wedding ribbons still hung in our bridal suite, my mother-in-law, Brenda, coldly ordered me to contribute $7,500 a month for expenses or leave her house. I was sitting on the bed folding leftover wedding cards when I heard Brenda's voice calling Ethan from downstairs. "Chloe, change your clothes and come down to the living room immediately. Your mother has something to discuss." Her tone wasn't a normal request. It was definitive, dry, carrying the authority of someone who had everything prepared and was just waiting for my arrival to deliver a verdict. I looked at Ethan, who was standing by the closet, a button-down shirt halfway on, his eyes momentarily flustered before he looked away. I asked, "Is Mom calling both of us?" Ethan nodded slightly. "She probably wants to talk about household arrangements. You go down, I'll back you up." His reply sounded reassuring, but for some reason, a strong sense of unease settled within me. When I stepped into the living room, I realized this wasn't a private family talk. Besides my father-in-law, Arthur, Brenda, and Ethan, there were also Vivian, Brenda's cousin, and 3 other relatives I'd only met at the wedding. They sat primly, some holding teacups, others cracking sunflower seeds, their eyes fixed on me as if expecting a show. On the coffee table lay a red binder, a handheld calculator, and 3 neatly stapled sheets of paper. The bold heading stopped me cold. First, Daughter-in-law's Household Contribution Agreement. Before I could even sit down, Brenda pointed to the single armchair opposite her and said, "Sit there, dear. The family members are here today to witness everything clearly, so later you can't claim I'm being arbitrary." I pulled up the chair and sat, back straight, hands on my lap. Brenda opened the red binder, put on her glasses, and declared loudly, "This family has always had rules. An outsider marrying in must take responsibility for the family. Starting this month, you will contribute $7,500 a month for household expenses. If you can't, then make arrangements to move out." The room fell silent for a few seconds. I looked at her, thinking I'd misheard. $7,500 wasn't a sum that scared me, but the way she publicly demanded it in front of relatives, on my second day as a daughter-in-law, made me feel less like a family member and more like a new revenue stream being tapped. I asked slowly, "What exactly does the $7,500 cover, Mom?" Brenda immediately pushed the paper towards me. Groceries, $1,500. Utilities, $750. Maid service, $1,200. Home maintenance, $1,050. Social obligations and family events, $1,500, and an additional $1,500 for the first daughter-in-law responsibility fee. I saw the last line and couldn't help but ask, "What exactly is the first daughter-in-law responsibility fee, Mom?" Vivian, sitting nearby, let out a snicker. "You're a businesswoman, and you don't understand? It's the money to show your commitment to your husband's family. Are you just going to live here, enjoy the house, and not contribute?" I turned to my mother-in-law. Before the wedding, Ethan and I agreed we'd only stay here for a few months, just to help with Dad after his heart treatment. I'm willing to share reasonable household costs, but $7,500 a month, including a daughter-in-law fee? I'd like to know the basis for this calculation. Brenda didn't answer directly. She turned to the other relatives, a self-satisfied smirk on her lips. "See? My daughter-in-law is a CEO with deep pockets, but she nickel and dimes every cent. I told you from the start, no matter how rich she is, she needs to know who's the mother and who's the daughter. If we don't tame her now, she'll walk all over this family later." Each word burned my face, but I kept my voice calm. At that moment, I understood she didn't just want $7,500. She wanted to use me to prove to the relatives that no matter how successful a woman was in the outside world, she would still have to bow down to Brenda in her home. Ethan, sitting next to me, finally spoke. "Mom, Let Chloe and I sort out the money. Bringing so many people here is making Chloe uncomfortable. Brenda immediately slammed her hand on the armrest. You've been married for 2 days and you've already forgotten your mother, haven't you? This is my house. I set the rules for my house. Don't interfere. Ethan frowned but then fell silent. I turned to look at my husband. He clearly disagreed but chose to remain still, afraid of embarrassing his mother in front of the relatives. That very silence disappointed me more than all of Brenda's bitter words. I picked up the agreement, read it one more time, and placed it back on the table. I looked directly at my mother-in-law and spoke each word clearly. If you consider me a tenant, then I also have the right to choose a place worthy of the money I'm spending. Brenda's face went pale. She slammed the table so hard that the teacups rattled. Don't you dare talk back to me, girl. By 5 p.m. today, either you sign or you pack up and get out. I mean it. I didn't argue, nor did I cry. I just gave a cold, faint smile and stood up. Don't worry, Mom. I don't make a habit of staying where I've been explicitly told to leave. The entire living room fell silent. Vivian smirked, as if expecting me to panic and apologize. But I walked up the stairs with a decision crystal clear in my mind. No one in that room knew that before the wedding, I had been offered to buy the mansion worth nearly $4 million directly across from my in-laws' house. And that very $7,500 demand had made me decide I would buy it. I ascended the stairs, the sound of my shoes tapping on each stone step echoing hollowly in the house that, just 2 days prior, had been adorned with wedding decorations. Behind me, Brenda's voice still rang out defiantly. Let her go. After a few days out there, she'll realize how much she values her husband's family. I didn't turn back, but as my hand touched the doorknob, memories of 3 years ago suddenly flooded back, making me wonder why a relationship that had begun with such kindness had come to such a bitter scene today. I met Ethan at a housing project where my company handled the interior design. At the time, I had been running my business for nearly 5 years. Ethan was the engineer overseeing the structural and finishing work. The first time we met, we didn't have a good impression of each other. He thought my design team proposed too many elaborate details, while I was annoyed that he constantly demanded adjustments to suit practical construction. In one meeting, I bluntly told him, "You can't just use ease of construction as an excuse to cut all our ideas." Ethan didn't get angry. He simply opened the blueprints, pointed to each spot, and replied, "I'm not cutting because I'm lazy. I'm cutting in places where, if done exactly as designed, clients will have to tear it down and repair it 6 months later. I'm responsible for this project. If it's beautiful but not durable, I won't sign off." His direct yet well-reasoned approach made me reevaluate. Later, on a joint site inspection, I personally witnessed Ethan making the crew tear down a section of a wall because they had used substandard materials. The subcontractor manager pulled him aside, quietly suggested being flexible, and promised him an appreciation fee. Ethan's face immediately turned cold. "I don't know whose money you're taking, but any project I sign off on must be done correctly. Don't make me say it a second time." From that day on, I started paying more attention to him. Ethan wasn't rich, nor did he have the flashy exterior of the men who usually appeared in my business meetings. He drove an old car he'd owned for years and ate lunch with the construction workers. His shirt always had a few smudges of dust, but his reports were never off by a single number. Ethan valued my decisiveness, and I trusted his integrity. We slowly grew closer, without expensive gifts or extravagant dinners. Sometimes, he'd take me to a small diner in a side street, order 2 bowls of noodles, and laugh. "I know you're used to fancy places, but this place is genuinely good. If you don't like it, we'll try somewhere else next time." I paid for that meal, and he immediately reimbursed half, texting. Being in love is about sharing. It's not about whoever has more paying for everything. Throughout our relationship, Ethan never asked to borrow money, nor did he suggest I invest in his projects. When he learned my income was many times higher than his, he simply said, "The money you earn is your hard work. I don't feel insecure, but I also don't want to live off you." This made me believe he was different from others who had sought me out for my company, assets, or family business connections. I also didn't completely hide my background. Brenda knew I had my own business, owned 2 rental apartments, and had bought a small house for my parents. Initially, she seemed very pleased. Every time I visited, she would pull me to sit beside her, asking about my work, then proudly bragging to neighbors, My future daughter-in-law is both talented and well-off, not the type who just expects her husband to provide. But as the wedding day drew closer, her remarks began to make me uncomfortable. Once, during dinner, she suddenly said, "After marriage, the money you earn will also be our family's money. As family, there's no yours and mine." I smiled faintly, responding that Ethan and I would discuss joint expenses, but individual assets still needed to be clear. She didn't say more, but her expression immediately soured. Another time, I bought Arthur a blood pressure and heart rate monitor because he had recently suffered a prolonged period of fatigue. Brenda didn't ask how to use it, but immediately looked at the receipt, saying, "This cost nearly $800? Why didn't you just give me the cash to hold on to? I could have bought it myself when needed. Wouldn't that be better?" I merely explained that the doctor I knew had recommended the device as suitable for his condition. After that, Ethan pulled me aside, looking apologetic, and said, "My mom is used to managing everything since she was young, so she wants to control everything. Don't think she has bad intentions." I looked at him. Managing a household is different from treating other people's money as your own. Ethan was silent for a moment, then promised that after we were married, he would clarify the boundaries between our finances and responsibilities to his parents. A week before the wedding, I coincidentally returned to the house to retrieve some forgotten documents. Standing outside the door, I overheard Brenda talking to Vivian. "She might be a boss on the outside, but in this house, she'll still go through me. If we don't tame her from the start, she'll walk all over us later." Vivian chuckled in agreement. "You have to teach her manners, sister. Rich women are often hard to control." That evening, I told Ethan everything. He was upset and said he would talk to his mother to clarify. But then he asked me to let it go until after the wedding, fearing that tension would ruin our big day. I believed him. Nevertheless, I quietly instructed my legal department to review all shares, real estate, and prenuptial accounts to ensure everything was managed independently and transparently. Around the same time, I learned that the two-story mansion across from Ethan's house was being sold quickly because the previous owner had moved in with her daughter. I had considered buying it as our private residence after the wedding, but Ethan asked me to live with his parents for 6 months to help take care of Arthur. I agreed out of love and a desire to integrate with his family. It's a pity my concession wasn't seen as goodwill. In Brenda's eyes, it became proof that I was ready to fall into the mold she had set. And by the second day after the wedding, she used my very silence to test how far she could push that limit. As the wedding day drew nearer, I realized that Ethan's promises of a transparent, respectful family life seemed not as easy to fulfill as I had thought. Brenda's unusual behaviors became more frequent. Not loud enough to immediately raise suspicion, but enough for someone in business like me to feel things were being manipulated. Initially, it was about the wedding venue. Ethan and I had agreed on a modest place, not overly extravagant, prioritizing good food and accessibility for older guests. Ethan had paid the deposit, and the guest list for both sides was finalized. Yet, just 3 weeks before the wedding, Brenda unilaterally switched to a larger ballroom, adding nearly 20 tables without consulting us. When I inquired, she said very naturally, "The bride's family is well off, so the wedding should match. People will judge your parents too, you know." I explained that money wasn't the main issue, but any changes needed to be discussed by both of us. As guest lists, menus, and budgets had all been calculated, she immediately frowned. "You're a businesswoman, and you're so calculating. A wedding is once in a lifetime. Should your mother-in-law have to beg for every table?" Ethan opposed his mother's unilateral decision, but Brenda didn't debate logically. She sat down, clutched her chest, and sobbed. "I just want my son to look good. If he marries a rich wife, and I let him have a cheap wedding, the relatives will say this family is ill-mannered." In the end, not wanting his mother to continue crying, Ethan reluctantly agreed to keep the new ballroom. Not only did she change the venue, she also invited dozens of people neither Ethan nor I had ever met. Some were just friends of distant relatives. Others had done business with her years ago. When Ethan asked why she invited so many, she casually replied, "More guests means more wedding gifts, darling. You have to be smart about a wedding to avoid a loss." That comment made me uncomfortable. To me, a wedding was a day for two families to witness their children starting a new life, not an occasion to collect money. However, I tried to convince myself that she was just overly concerned with appearances, not necessarily harboring deeper schemes. One time, while at their house to discuss decorations, I overheard Brenda talking to some relatives. She boasted that everything from the venue and wedding gown to the stage decorations was handled by her. Someone asked about the considerable cost, and she laughed loudly. My son is getting married. I spare no expense. I put in most of the money. I wasn't expecting anything from the bride's family. I stood outside the door, stunned. In reality, over 70% of the costs were paid from a joint account Ethan and I had set up specifically for the wedding. My contribution was larger because I proactively chose several items for both sets of parents. Brenda had only contributed a small amount for her family's portion of the reception, but in front of relatives, she made herself out to be the sole provider. I didn't step in to expose her immediately. That evening, I recounted everything to Ethan. He sighed and said, "Mom likes to be praised. As long as she doesn't touch our money, we should just let it go." I looked at him and asked, "A false statement, if continuously ignored, will become the truth in everyone's eyes. Are you sure Mom only wants praise?" Ethan fell silent. It didn't stop there. Brenda also demanded that all the wedding money from the groom's side be given to her. She reasoned that she had invited those guests, so she needed the money to cover hosting costs. I disagreed because some of the gifts were from my friends, colleagues, and business partners sent directly to us. In the end, I only agreed to let her manage the guest list for the groom's side, but the counting of the money had to be done in the presence of both Ethan and me. Her attitude since then noticeably cooled. She often hinted that a daughter-in-law who hoarded money before even settling in would find it hard to be affectionate later. Daisy, Ethan's sister, also began to chime in. One afternoon she pulled me onto the balcony, smiling sweetly. "Chloe, will you help me open a cosmetics store later? You're a big businesswoman. Investing a few $100,000 in me probably isn't much." I didn't refuse outright, but asked about her business plan, suppliers, and projected costs. Daisy's face immediately changed. "We're family. Why are you acting like a bank doing due diligence?" I calmly replied, "Investment money needs to be put to good use. I'd help you build a business, but I can't just hand over money just because you ask." After that, Daisy told her mother that I looked down on her lack of ability. Brenda then more frequently spoke of contribution. She said a woman who earned a lot but didn't take care of her husband's family was selfish, married but still focused on her birth family. One day, Arthur discreetly called me outside, his voice lowered. "You should keep your money matters clear. Your mother-in-law has been short on cash lately, but she won't tell me what it's for when I ask." I brought this up with Ethan. He said his mother still had a pension and rental income from a small property, so she couldn't be in serious financial distress. He guessed she had simply overspent on the wedding. I listened, but deep down, I wasn't entirely convinced. People who are merely short on cash from overspending usually don't hide it from their own husband. The day before the wedding, as I brought over decorations, I saw a strange man standing outside the gate, talking agitatedly with Brenda. He wasn't yelling, but his cold gaze and the way he thrust a paper close to her face indicated this was no ordinary exchange. As soon as Brenda saw me, she immediately pulled him away. When I asked, she said he was a contractor demanding payment for materials. But he wasn't carrying blueprints, invoices, or construction documents, just a sheet of paper with many dates and numbers circled in red. That detail amplified my suspicions. Still, I didn't want to turn my wedding day into an investigation. I silently asked my chief accountant to keep an eye out for any loan, investment, or transfer requests involving my in-laws' family. At that time, I still didn't know that Brenda had been bragging everywhere that, after the wedding, she would make me pay at least $7,500 every month. She didn't just want money. She wanted all the relatives to see that no matter how successful I was, once I entered her home, I would still be under her thumb, and that very thought had silently prepared for the confrontation that would erupt just 2 days after the wedding. My wedding day with Ethan unfolded exactly as Brenda wished. Many guests, abundant flowers, dazzling lights, and endless toasts. She wore a deep red velvet dress, a large pearl necklace, and everywhere she went, she held my hand, introducing me to everyone with a proud voice. "This is my daughter-in-law, so talented and so obedient. I treat her like my own daughter." Each time I heard that, I just offered a polite smile. If they didn't know what had happened before, perhaps everyone would have believed I had found a thoughtful and generous mother-in-law. She constantly adjusted my dress, reminded staff to bring water, and stood before relatives, cautioning Ethan, If you ever make your wife sad, I'll deal with you first. These sweet words even made some from my side of the family praise my good fortune. The reception ended close to 11 p.m., with most guests having left. I was so tired my feet were numb, and my makeup was starting to smudge. As I changed out of my heavy wedding dress, I suddenly remembered the gift envelopes the venue staff had moved to the accounting room. I asked Ethan, and he said his mother had already taken care of it. Tomorrow morning, we just need to review the list. I felt uneasy, so I went downstairs with him. As we neared the lounge at the end of the hall, I heard Brenda speaking to the staff member in charge of the envelopes. Transfer all the money from the groom's side into my private room. Just leave the list here. I'll tally it myself tomorrow. The employee seemed flustered and asked again, but Miss Hayes, the bride and groom, specifically requested to count it together. Brenda immediately lowered her voice. I am the groom's mother. I invited my guests, so I'll keep my share. What's there to question? I walked in at that very moment, and the atmosphere in the room immediately tensed. She looked at me, a flicker of annoyance on her face, then quickly smiled. Not resting yet, dear? I'm just helping you two collect everything to avoid any loss. I replied softly, Thank you, Mom. But the gifts are from everyone for Ethan and me, including our friends and business partners. We should count it openly, with Mom, Dad, and Ethan present, so there are no misunderstandings later. Her smile froze. She slammed a fabric bag onto the table. Are you afraid I'm stealing your money? I invited the groom's guests, so it's right that I keep their gifts to cover hosting costs. Before I could speak, Ethan stepped forward, his voice more resolute than usual. Mom, this money is from people congratulating Chloe and me. You can't just keep it. Any expenses that need to be paid, we will reconcile, and Chloe and I will reimburse you. Brenda stared at her son, as if she couldn't believe he dared to say such a thing in front of an outsider. Her face fell, but in the end, she had to agree to count the money. For over an hour, she barely spoke to me. Every time she saw an envelope with a large amount, she would ask which side the sender was from, her eyes betraying her calculations. When everything was done, I thought I'd at least get a few hours of rest. But at exactly 5:00 a.m. the next day, frantic knocking roused me from less than 3 hours of sleep. Brenda stood outside, her voice cold. Get up and make breakfast, Chloe. There are still over a dozen distant relatives who haven't left. Letting guests go hungry will make people judge this family. I went down to the kitchen, almost fully exhausted. On the counter were rice, meat, vegetables, and a pot of unprocessed bones. I didn't refuse to cook. I just suggested she call Daisy or some relatives to help, as it would be difficult for me to prepare a meal for over 10 people alone. Brenda immediately spoke loudly so those in the living room could hear. She's used to being a boss and ordering people around. Now that she's a daughter-in-law, a little effort, and she starts calculating. In my day, after I got married, I cooked for the entire family and never complained. I bit my lip and didn't retort. Ethan heard the argument and came down, rolling up his sleeves to wash vegetables. Let me help Chloe. She barely rested yesterday. Brenda watched her son standing beside me, her face red with anger. Married for 1 day and already making your husband work in the kitchen. Next, she'll probably make you put her on a pedestal. Ethan stopped, stating clearly, I'm helping on my own, no one's making me. That answer silenced her, but her gaze at me grew colder. During breakfast, Vivian deliberately brought up a topic. Brenda, with a CEO daughter-in-law, aren't you afraid she'll take over everything in the house? Brenda sipped her tea, smirking. I have my ways. My house doesn't keep people who only care about their own money. Come here, you have to contribute. No one is allowed to live as they please. That evening, walking past Daisy's room, I heard the mother and daughter arguing inside. Daisy spoke hurriedly. Mom, you said Chloe would give us some money after the wedding. Why hasn't she yet? The payment is due, and they've been calling me all day. Brenda lowered her voice. Keep it down. She just got married. We need to pressure her slowly. I froze in the hallway. Just then, the door opened, and seeing me, both immediately fell silent. Brenda gave a strained smile. Daisy and I were just talking about her upcoming inventory. Nothing important. I nodded and walked away, but every word I'd overheard was imprinted on my mind. The morning of the second day, she invited the relatives, placed the $7,500 contribution agreement on the table, and believed I would sign it out of respect for my new marriage, my love for Ethan, and fear of gossip. But it was precisely her turning money matters into a public display of dominance that pushed all my patience to its limit. After placing the $7,500 agreement on the table and declaring I wouldn't stay where I'd been told to leave, I turned and walked straight to my room. Behind me, Brenda's voice still echoed defiantly. Let her go and see. She'll realize how she'll live without her in-laws' house. I didn't respond, nor did I look back. Sometimes, arguing further only convinces unreasonable people that they still have room to negotiate. I opened my closet, took out a small suitcase, and packed only the truly essential items. Not many clothes, just a few work outfits, personal identification, my laptop, and company-related files. My wedding dress still hung in the corner of the room, its pristine white lace vibrant against the wedding-decorated room. I looked at it for a few seconds, then zipped up my suitcase. Just 2 days ago, I thought the door to this room opened to a new life. Today, I had to close it myself to preserve my self-respect. Ethan walked in, quickly closed the door, and stood blocking my suitcase. His face was tense, his voice low but urgent. Chloe, calm down. I'll talk to Mom again. I don't agree with the $7,500, and I especially don't agree with Mom inviting relatives to pressure you like that. I looked up at my husband. Then why didn't you speak up when your mother publicly humiliated me in front of everyone? He didn't answer immediately. Ethan paused. He opened his mouth several times but couldn't find a convincing explanation. After a moment, he sighed. I've always been used to deferring to Mom since I was little. She has a quick temper and high blood pressure. Every time I argued, she'd clutch her chest and cry. Then the whole family would say I was unfilial. I just feared everything would blow up right after the wedding. After hearing him, my heart no longer felt the anger I had downstairs, only weariness. I said slowly, I'm not asking you to cut ties with your parents, nor am I asking you to be disrespectful to your mother. But every time your mom is in the wrong, if you choose silence to maintain your image as a dutiful son, I will always be the one who pays the price. Ethan stepped forward and took my hand. I'll go with you. Let's move out today. Whatever Mom wants to say, let her say it. I gently withdrew my hand. No, you stay here for now. Ethan froze, clearly not understanding why I rejected his offer. I explained, Dad just finished heart treatment. His health isn't stable. If you leave in anger, then, a few days later, out of concern for your father, you'll come back. Everything will revert to how it was. I don't need an impulsive act. I need you to stay, to clearly define boundaries with your mother yourself, and to prove that you can protect this marriage with a clear mind. Ethan lowered his head, his hands tightly clenched. I looked at him, and then spoke the words I had carefully considered. I don't need you to choose between your mother and your wife. I just need you to choose between right and wrong. If you cannot even do that, then we are not fit to live together. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes reddening, but he didn't stop me anymore. Before I pulled my suitcase out the door, I added, I'm not giving up on this marriage today, but I also cannot continue to stay in a house where the right to be a daughter-in-law is measured by money. I carried my suitcase downstairs to the living room. Brenda was still sitting in the armchair, beside Vivian and some relatives who hadn't left. Seeing me actually packing, she paused slightly, but quickly regained her cold demeanor. I placed my room key on the table. I will leave before 5 p.m., as you requested. For my remaining belongings, I will arrange for someone to pick them up when convenient. Brenda gave a sarcastic laugh. Once you leave, don't call my son in the middle of the night to pick you up. This house isn't a marketplace. You can't just waltz in and out as you please. I pulled up my suitcase handle and calmly replied, You don't need to worry, Mom. From tomorrow on, every time you open your door, you'll still be able to see me. Brenda frowned. Vivian also looked at me skeptically, but no one understood what I meant. I didn't explain further. I simply nodded to Arthur and walked out the gate that I had entered 2 days earlier to the sound of wedding, fireworks, and blessings. Out on the street, I didn't call a cab to my parents' house. I stood under a tree, pulled out my phone, and called the owner of the mansion across the street. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had moved most of her belongings to live with her daughter and wanted to sell the house quickly to settle down. I stated frankly, Do you still have the offer to sell the house? If the paperwork is still the same as I reviewed last time, I'll put down a deposit this afternoon and finalize the transaction as soon as possible. She seemed surprised, but immediately agreed. I had previously viewed the house and had my legal department check the ownership, zoning, and mortgage status. A sale price of nearly $4 million wasn't a decision to be made in a minute, but this wasn't an impulsive choice either. I had considered that house before. I just hadn't had a compelling enough reason to close the deal. That afternoon, vehicles from my legal department, architectural team, and technical crew successively pulled up in front of the mansion across the street from my in-laws. People measured, others checked the electrical and plumbing systems, and someone took down the for sale sign from the gate. The usually quiet street suddenly became bustling. Brenda saw this and pulled Vivian out into her front yard. She spoke loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. "I wonder who has so much money to buy that showy house. A big house without occupants is just a breeding ground for dust." Just then, my car pulled up to the mansion's gate. I stepped out, signed the handover document, and received a bunch of keys from the former owner. I turned to my architectural team and clearly instructed, "Renovate the office first. Check the kitchen and main bedroom. I'll move in 3 days." The entire street immediately fell silent. Brenda stood frozen, her eyes glued to the keys in my hand. I turned and smiled, just polite enough. "You told me to leave your house, so I did. But I find this neighborhood very peaceful. So I decided to buy the house across the street for now." Her face turned from bewildered to flushed, then purple. She couldn't send me far away as she had imagined. From now on, every time she stepped out of her door, she would see a larger, grander mansion right before her eyes. Ethan walked out of his house and stood silently in the yard. In his eyes, there was not only astonishment but also a belated realization. I was not a woman who needed to cling to his family for a place to live. If he wanted to save this marriage, he was not the one who had to change. Just as everyone was still stunned, the man who had appeared before the wedding suddenly stopped his car at the end of the alley. He looked at the mansion, then at Brenda's house, and immediately pulled out his phone to call someone. I only managed to remember his face and license plate, a chilling premonition rising in my heart. Perhaps the $7,500 demand was not just a show of dominance from my mother-in-law. Behind it lay a secret she was trying to bury with my money. That first evening, after signing the contract for the mansion across the street, I hadn't fully moved in, only brought over essential items for work. The technical team was still inspecting the electrical and plumbing systems, and several workers were constantly moving materials in and out. Across the street, Brenda's gate had been closed early, and the living room curtains were tightly drawn. Yet every time a delivery truck stopped in front of my house, those curtains would subtly flutter, as if someone was secretly watching. Brenda forbade her family from mentioning me. She snapped at Daisy, "No one is to go over there. If she wants to show off, let her show off alone. A big house without happiness is just a cold, empty shell." But Brenda herself kept going in and out of the living room, checking the clock, then peeking through the curtains. The more she saw my professional crew working, the more unpleasant her expression became. Vivian stayed late into the evening. Her voice carried faintly through the glass, just enough for me to catch snippets. She didn't buy the house across the street to live in. She's building her throne right in front of your house to show you who's boss. If you back down this time, the whole family will laugh at you forever. Brenda gritted her teeth and replied, "I've never been afraid of her. I just didn't expect her to go this far." Ethan finally couldn't take it anymore. He said loudly, "Aunt, don't add fuel to the fire. This whole thing started because Mom forced my wife to pay $7,500 in front of the relatives. Chloe didn't just buy a house to one-up us." The room across the street fell silent for a few seconds. Then Brenda's sobs erupted. "See, you hear that? She's only been married for 2 days, and she's already turned my son against me. I raised him for 30-something years, and now I'm worth less than a woman who just walked into our house." She cried and clutched her chest. But this time, Ethan didn't rush to apologize as before. He quietly led Arthur upstairs, leaving Brenda to continue her lament below. Around midnight, after the workers had left, I stood on the second-floor balcony, reviewing the repair list. The street was quiet, yellow lights casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the trees. Just then, a black car stopped in front of Brenda's house. The man I had seen before the wedding stepped out first. This time he was accompanied by 2 men in dark jackets, heavily built. No one rang the doorbell. Perhaps Brenda had been waiting. As the gate opened just wide enough for them to enter, I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but the man's voice grew steadily clearer. He held a paper close to Brenda's face and said coldly, "This is my final warning. If I don't have $100,000 in interest and penalties in 3 days, I'm taking the house in your name." Brenda lowered her voice, pleading, "Leo, please give me more time. My daughter-in-law just moved in. She has a big company. Money isn't an issue. I'll arrange it." The man named Leo gave a sarcastic laugh. "You've said that 3 times already. I don't lend on sentiment, I lend on paper." Hearing that, I immediately understood that the $7,500 monthly payment was just the tip of a very large debt. Brenda wasn't simply trying to show off to relatives. She was trying to turn me into a source of funds to cover a financial hole that she could no longer hide. The next morning, just as the workers arrived, Arthur quietly walked over to my house. He didn't ring the main doorbell but called my name softly from outside, looking both sheepish and weary. I invited him into the temporarily set-up living room, poured him a warm glass of water, and asked directly, "Dad, you knew about Mom borrowing money, didn't you?" Arthur lowered his head for a long time, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles pale and thin. Finally he spoke. "I only knew she borrowed, but not how much. Before, she had me sign some papers, saying they were renewal documents for a rental contract. I trusted my wife, so I didn't read them carefully." His voice trembled. "I'm afraid she put my share of the assets up as collateral. It's my fault for staying silent all these years for the sake of peace." I didn't blame him. Someone accustomed to yielding for a long time often believes silence is a way to protect the family. Only when things shatter do they realize that very silence has nurtured the mistake. I simply told him clearly, "Dad, you need to retrieve all the papers you signed, bank statements, power of attorney documents, and relevant contracts. If we keep hiding things for fear of losing face, the whole family could lose everything." Arthur nodded, his eyes showing clear fear but also a hint of determination. He hadn't left long before Daisy stormed in, without even greeting me. She slammed her purse on the table, growling, "Are you satisfied now, Chloe? My mom didn't sleep all night. Her blood pressure is up because you concocted this scheme to buy the house across the street." I looked at her. "Are you here to blame me, or do you want to discuss something else?" Daisy didn't beat around the bush anymore. She demanded $50,000 up front to sort things out at home. I asked, "What is the $50,000 for? Who are you paying? Do you have any paperwork?" Daisy stuttered for a few seconds, then lost her temper. "You're so rich. What's $50,000 to you? You're a daughter-in-law in this family, so you have a responsibility." I replied calmly, "Precisely because I'm in business, I don't give money when I don't know the purpose. From now on, anyone who wants my help must clearly state the debt, the recipient, the reason, and who is responsible." Daisy slammed her hand on the table. "You're truly heartless." I looked straight at her. "No, heartless is knowing your family is drowning and still hiding the truth, just waiting for someone else to bring money to fill the hole." Daisy, speechless, snatched her bag, stood up, and left. But that evening, as she secretly carried a folder of documents into her mother's room, she didn't realize Ethan was coming down the stairs. The bag fell. A paper slid out onto the floor. A loan agreement, with the borrower's name as Ethan Hayes, and a signature below it in his name. Ethan picked up the paper, his face turning pale. He looked at his sister and asked, word for word, "Who signed my name here?" Daisy stood frozen, and Brenda rushed out of her room, trying to snatch the folder, but this time Ethan wouldn't let go. That shock finally made him understand that his weakness was no longer about maintaining peace in the family. It was becoming a cover for actions that could land the entire family in legal trouble. The loan agreement remained in Ethan's hand. The edges of the paper crinkled from his tight grip. Brenda stood directly in front of her son, trying to snatch the folder, but Ethan took a step back, quickly folded the contract, and put it in his shirt pocket. The familiar look of awkwardness he usually had when facing his mother was gone. There was only a coldness that made both Brenda and Daisy afraid to speak further. That night, Ethan didn't come to me. He discreetly took photos of all the documents, and early the next morning, he took copies to an old friend named Sam, who was now a legal counsel for a construction company. He didn't want to jump to conclusions based solely on intuition, because if the forged signature was real, this matter was no longer just a family dispute. Near noon, Ethan finally called me. His voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. "Chloe, I need to see you. This is more serious than we thought. I met him in my temporary office in the new mansion. When he walked in, he placed 3 papers in front of me, marked with red pen. Sam had compared the signature on the loan agreement with Ethan's actual signature on his employment records and bank accounts. The forgery was quite sophisticated, mimicking the flick of the final stroke and the slant of the letters, but the pressure of the pen was inconsistent. The spacing between characters was also clearly different. More importantly, the phone number used to confirm the loan was not Ethan's, but belonged to someone who used to work as a sales associate for Daisy's cosmetics store. The initial loan amounted to $300,000 for the purpose of importing a batch of high-end cosmetics from abroad. I read the asset description and payment terms, then asked, "How much inventory does Daisy's store currently have?" Ethan shook his head. "Almost empty." She said sales were slow recently, so she didn't restock. But if she had invested nearly $300,000 in inventory, it shouldn't be empty, without invoices, and with no revenue. I immediately understood that the money had gone elsewhere. Either the inventory never existed, or the money was used to pay off an old debt. In either case, forging Ethan's signature was an act that could not be taken lightly. That afternoon, Ethan returned home and called the entire family down to the kitchen. He didn't want to talk in the living room, where Brenda usually asserted her authority. He placed the contract on the counter, looked straight at Daisy, and asked, "Tell me the truth. Where's the money? Who gave you permission to sign my name?" Daisy's face turned pale at the sight of the paper. She backed up against the refrigerator, her hands twisting her clothes. I didn't sign it. I just gave them a signature sample." Ethan lightly slammed his hand on the counter. "Gave it to whom?" Daisy burst into tears. "Mom told me to just do it. She said after you married Chloe, she would pay everything back. Mom also said that it's okay for family to use each other's names." Brenda rushed in from outside, snatched the contract, and tore off a corner. She yelled, "We're family!" "What's so terrible about borrowing names? Daisy's business lost money, so the whole family bears the burden. Chloe is rich. Now that she's married in, she's responsible for taking care of her husband's family." Ethan looked at his mother for a long time. Perhaps it was at that moment that he fully understood why his mother had rushed the wedding, why she forced me to pay $7,500 just 2 days after the wedding, and why Daisy had been so sure I would provide the money. His marriage had been turned into a debt rescue plan by his own family. He asked, his voice filled with pain but decisive, "Mom, did you marry me off? Or did you find someone to pay off your family's debts?" Brenda froze for a few seconds, then suddenly swung her hand and slapped her son hard across the face. The slap echoed sharply in the kitchen. "How dare you speak to your mother like that? I raised you to this age. And now, just for some woman, you turn around and accuse your mother?" Ethan flinched from the blow, but didn't back down. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at his mother. "From today on, no one is to use my name, my accounts, my documents, or my signature. Not you, Mom. Not Daisy. If it happens again, I will personally file a report." Brenda pointed a trembling finger at his face, shaking with anger. "Go ahead. Call the police to arrest your mother. Do it now. Let the whole family know I gave birth to an unfilial child." This time, Arthur walked in from the doorway. He had heard the entire argument, but no longer chose to avoid it as before. He stood next to Ethan, his voice not loud but firm. "Brenda, stop it. If you're wrong, admit it. Don't keep using mother as an excuse to make your children cover for you." Brenda spun around to face her husband, unable to believe that the man who had been silent for so many years dared to openly oppose her. "You're siding with them too?" Arthur sighed. "I'm not siding with anyone, I just don't want this family to lose everything because of pride and greed." Daisy was now sitting on the floor, sobbing. She confessed that Vivian had introduced her to a source of cheap imported cosmetics, advertised as a one-time investment that would triple her profit in 6 months. Vivian had even taken Daisy to meet people called distributors, showing her warehouses, pre-orders, and impressive sales reports. Daisy and her mother trusted them, borrowed money to import the first batch, but the goods were seized by authorities upon arrival due to a lack of proper origin documents. Their entire capital was stuck, while interest accrued daily. Instead of stopping, Vivian continued to persuade them to borrow more to import another batch, saying they could recover everything if they just sold it. Brenda and Daisy kept taking new loans to pay off old ones. Vivian always stayed out of the paperwork, merely introducing lenders, suppliers, and ways to juggle money. When things spun out of control, she advised them to wait until I was married into the family, then use my financial resources to fill all the loopholes. Ethan's eyes turned red as he listened. He immediately wanted to take the documents to the authorities, but I stopped him. I said reporting was necessary, but not right now. What we have now only proves the forged signature and questionable loan. Vivian's role, where the money went, who's behind the suppliers, these are still unclear. If we tip them off, she'll delete messages, transfer money, and destroy records. Ethan was silent for a very long time, then turned to me. For the first time, he didn't use phrases like, "Please understand, Mom," or "Let's just bear with it." He said directly, "Chloe, I'm sorry that I made you have to defend yourself even within this marriage. From now on, I won't stand in the middle anymore. On matters of right, I will stand with what's right." I didn't say I had forgiven him. Some wounds don't disappear with just an apology. But I agreed to let him participate in handling the crisis, on the condition that from now on, all documents, meetings, and decisions had to be transparent. I looked at each person and stated clearly, "We will seek the truth, but we must not act in anger. First, we must protect Mom and Dad, preserve all evidence, and absolutely not let Vivian know the family is onto her." Brenda sat silently by the counter, her face pale. For the first time, she was not the one giving orders to everyone, and Ethan, after years of trying to please everyone, finally understood that sometimes no choice is a choice, and the one who bears the consequences is often the most innocent. After the confrontation in the kitchen, the atmosphere among my in-laws changed significantly. Ethan no longer avoided difficult conversations. Arthur began proactively reviewing documents, and Daisy barely dared to leave her phone, fearing a call from Vivian. Only Brenda remained silently restless in the living room, sometimes looking at my mansion, other times looking down at her hands, as if she couldn't believe she had been led so far astray. I thought we would at least have a few peaceful days to gather evidence, but Vivian was faster than I expected. Perhaps she had sensed the change in everyone's attitude and immediately shifted from instigating to counterattacking, trying to make me the cause of my in-laws' family breakdown. The next morning, a relative called Brenda, barraging her with questions about whether I was forcing Ethan to move out and even planning to seize my in-laws' house. Less than an hour later, a flurry of messages appeared in the family chat group. Some said I bought the mansion across the street to spy on my in-laws. Others claimed I was using money to control Ethan. Some even asserted I was waiting for the house to be foreclosed so I could buy it cheap. All sources pointed back to Vivian. She told relatives I had orchestrated everything from the start, deliberately marrying Ethan to get access to family assets. The most absurd thing was that many people still believed it, simply because the story fit their prejudice that a rich woman is always manipulative and likes to control others. By noon, Vivian posted a short audio clip in the group featuring my exact voice saying, "As soon as that house is foreclosed, I'll buy it for a cheap price." The words were crystal clear, not distorted or altered. If only that clip was heard, even a clear-minded person might become suspicious. Brenda heard it and immediately lost control. She stormed out of her gate and ran straight to my house while workers were busy. Before she even reached the threshold, she was screaming, "Chloe Hayes, come out here! You turned my son against me, and now you want to steal my house too, don't you?" Neighbors started opening their doors, and the workers paused. I stepped down onto the porch, not raising my voice. "Mom, please come inside. I'll let you hear the full audio." Brenda refused. She pointed a finger at my face, her voice hoarse with anger. "Don't act anymore. It's your voice, isn't it? I knew you bought this house with ulterior motives." I understood that at that moment she wasn't listening with reason. Vivian's words had struck her biggest fears: losing her home, losing control, and being abandoned by her son. The more I argued in public, the more she would feel cornered. Just then, Ethan ran across the street. He stood in front of me and turned to his mother. "Mom, you can scold me all you want, but you cannot accuse my wife of something she didn't do." Brenda froze. In her eyes, there was both anger and pain. "You've changed. Before, you would never speak to me like that. She made you into a different person." Ethan replied, his voice not loud but clear. "No one changed me. It's just that before, I always remained silent, even when I knew you were wrong. Now, I won't do that anymore." Not wanting things to escalate further on the street, I asked my staff to play the full video recording from the camera in my office. The complete segment was played on a large screen. In it, I was saying to my lawyer, "If that house across the street is foreclosed, I will find a way to help ensure Arthur and Brenda don't lose their home. We cannot let the lender buy it back at a cheap price." My actual statement was entirely contrary to the edited clip. The beginning and end had been removed, with only a few words kept and reassembled in a different order. Some of the relatives present began to murmur, and some even openly stated in the group chat that the audio had been doctored. Vivian immediately denied it, messaging that she had only received it from someone else, found it suspicious, so she forwarded it for everyone to be cautious. But I knew this was just the first step. Someone who dared to forge signatures and fabricate documents wouldn't stop at just one audio clip. That same afternoon, my company's media department called me in a state of panic. An anonymous account had just posted an article accusing my business of using substandard materials, tax evasion, and bribing clients to win contracts. Accompanying the article were many invoices, statements, and photos of internal documents that looked very authentic. In less than 2 hours, a major client requested to temporarily halt our contract pending verification. An inspection team also unexpectedly arrived, causing confusion among my employees. If not handled quickly, the reputation I had built over many years could be destroyed in just a few days. I instructed my account. After checking, we discovered that the fake invoices were created from an internal template that had been discontinued over a year ago. This template had been saved on an old laptop that I had lent to Daisy to develop her cosmetic store business plan. When I asked, Daisy turned pale. She sat down, her hands trembling, then confessed that after her store failed, she had taken the laptop to Vivian. Vivian had said she would find someone to review the books, find a way to save the store, and raise additional capital. Daisy burst into tears. "I didn't know she took your documents, Chloe. I just thought she was helping me. I put the knife in their hands to hurt you." I didn't scold her. The situation was too serious. Blame would only make everyone continue to hide things. I looked at Daisy and said, "You made a mistake, and you have to take responsibility. But crying won't help anyone right now. You need to clearly remember every time you handed over documents, every account, every meeting, and every person Vivian introduced." Daisy looked up, tears still flowing, but her eyes no longer evasive. She nodded. "I'll tell everything. Even if I have to face the consequences, I won't let her drag the whole family down any further." My refusal to corner Daisy made her truly want to make amends for the first time. From someone who once thought my money was an obligation to be shared with her in-laws, she began to understand that her greed and naivety had harmed many people. And I knew very well that Vivian had officially declared war, and once she dared to attack my honor, my work, and my life, the next step would certainly be much more dangerous. After Daisy agreed to recount everything she knew, we didn't immediately call Vivian. I asked her to sit down and try to recall Vivian's communication style, attitude, and the phrases she often used when pressuring her. To make a cunning person drop their guard, one cannot simply pretend to be scared. One must make them believe the prey is still dependent on them. That evening, Daisy called Vivian using her old phone number. As soon as the other end picked up, she immediately burst into tears. "Aunt Vivian, Ethan found out about the signature. Chloe is forcing me to hand over all the documents, and Mom is blaming me too. I don't know what to do." Vivian was silent for a few seconds, then lowered her voice, feigning concern. "I told you, dear, no one in that family genuinely cares about you. That Chloe has money and wants to corner your whole family. Do you still have the store documents and the folder I gave you?" Daisy feigned panic. "I do, but I'm so scared. Maybe I should just burn everything." Vivian immediately snapped. "No, don't burn anything. Bring everything to me. Don't tell anyone, not even your mother. I'll help you handle it." She arranged to meet Daisy at a diner located at the end of a small, quiet street, far from residential areas. The diner only had a few tables and chairs, and there were almost no customers in the afternoon. Daisy hid a small recording device in her purse, while Ethan and I sat in a car parked nearly 100 yards away. Arthur brought Brenda along, but they stayed in a different car to avoid being noticed. Before Daisy got out, Ethan held his sister's hand. "If you feel unsafe, get up and leave immediately. Don't worry about getting more evidence." Daisy nodded, her voice slightly trembling. "I understand. This time, I won't let everyone else bear my burdens again." Vivian arrived about 10 minutes later, accompanied by 2 men I had seen with Leo before. She sat down opposite Daisy, not wasting time with pleasantries, but immediately extending her hand. "Where are the documents and papers?" Daisy placed her bag on the table but didn't open it. She pretended to cry and asked, "Aunt, please tell me the truth. What exactly was my store used for? Why was the initial loan only $300,000, but now they're demanding so much?" Vivian frowned, but perhaps seeing Daisy still appeared weak, she began to drop her guard. She said, "The $300,000 was just the initial amount. After that, your mom took bridging loans and more loans just to pay the interest, then imported more goods. Adding principal, interest, and penalties, it's now close to $1 million. Daisy." Seth's face turned pale. Despite having prepared herself for a largesum. $1 million? Where did Mom get so much money? Vivian sneered. If she didn't have it, she had to borrow. The house is there, your brother has a job, your daughter-in-law has a company. If you know how to leverage, there's always a way. Daisy continued, but half the house belongs to Dad. He never agreed to mortgage it. Vivian leaned back in her chair, her voice full of confidence. He wouldn't know anything. Your mom provided the signature sample, and I handled the power of attorney. As long as the documents looked legitimate, the lender accepted them. In the car, Arthur heard that and trembled all over, his hands clutching his knees, his face pale. Brenda, sitting next to him, was also frozen. Perhaps it was at that moment that she realized the papers she had trusted Vivian to sign had not only plunged her into debt but could also cost her husband his legal share of their assets. Daisy tried to keep her voice normal. Aunt, you knew the power of attorney was fake, but you still did it? Vivian casually folded her arms. Business requires flexibility. Your mom needed money, I helped. After your daughter-in-law married in, your mom pressured her to pay $7,500 a month, and then used her company's reputation to secure more loans. Just keeping it afloat for a year would be enough to cycle through the funds. I listened to every word, a cold shiver running down my spine. It turned out that even before the wedding, they weren't just targeting my household contribution. Vivian also wanted to use my company's name as a front for their entire scheme. Daisy looked up and asked one last question. You and Mom are cousins. Why would you drag her into this? Vivian burst out laughing, her eyes cold. What's sisterhood when money is on the table? Your mom is too proud. I just needed to flatter her a few times, and she walked right into the trap herself. Greedy people who don't know they're greedy are the easiest to manipulate. Brenda heard that and flung open the car door, about to rush out. I immediately held her back. Mom, stay calm. If you go out now, she'll deny everything. We need her to talk more about the money trail and the people behind it. Brenda turned to me, tears streaming down her face, speechless. The person she trusted, the one who always sat beside her, urging her to discipline her daughter-in-law, had turned out to view her as nothing more than an easily manipulated tool. Inside the diner, Vivian suddenly frowned. A faint buzzing sound came from Daisy's bag. She lunged forward, snatched the bag, and ransacked it. Within seconds, the recording device lay in her hand. You're recording me? She jumped up, slamming a hard slap across Daisy's face. Daisy stumbled off the chair but held onto the folder of documents tightly. The two men with Vivian immediately stood up and locked the diner's doors. One held Daisy, the other snatched her phone. Vivian gritted her teeth. Delete all the data. You won't leave here today if you don't hand over those papers. Ethan couldn't sit still any longer. He got out of the car and ran straight into the diner. Before I could stop him, I heard the crash of chairs. Ethan pushed away the man holding Daisy, but the other assailant swung a chair straight at his shoulder. Arthur, seeing his son being attacked, disregarded his own health and rushed in to shield Ethan. He yelled out, If you want to hit someone, hit me. Don't touch my children. Brenda stood outside the door, trembling all over. But this time, she wasn't afraid of neighbors seeing, wasn't afraid of relatives criticizing. She ran into the middle of the street screaming, Help! Someone's holding my children hostage and hitting them! Call the authorities. Her cries drew people from the surrounding area. The two men inside the diner panicked and rushed out the back door. Vivian managed to grab Daisy's phone and quickly got into a car and drove away, completely unaware that the entire recording had been automatically saved to my system from the very first minute. Ethan leaned against the wall, one hand clutching his injured shoulder. Daisy rushed to him, hugging her brother and sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, Ethan. Because of my greed, our whole family almost lost everything. Ethan didn't blame her. He just placed his other hand on her head and whispered, If you know you made a mistake, then don't hide anything anymore. Brenda stood a few steps away, her face bewildered. She looked at her husband, then her children, and finally turned to me. No more excuses, no more blaming, she just spoke brokenly. I was wrong from the moment I thought that because you had money, you had to bear all of this family's mistakes. I didn't say everything was over, because before us still lay the network behind Vivian and the nearly $1 million debt that remained unresolved. But at least for the first time, this family looked directly at the truth, and no one tried to cover it up with the word pride. After the incident at the diner, Vivian disappeared with Daisy's phone and some unsalvaged documents. We knew she wouldn't sit idly by, but no one expected her counterattack to come so swiftly. The very next morning, a sensational video appeared simultaneously on several online platforms titled, "Female CEO Hires Thugs to Assault Mother-in-Law to Seize House." The video only showed Ethan rushing into the diner, pushing a man away from Daisy, and then my people restraining the other two. The part where Daisy was slapped, had her phone snatched, and was locked inside was completely absent. The uploader also wrote that I had prepared everything beforehand to force Vivian to hand over property deeds, and that my in-laws were victims of intimidation. The story was cleverly fabricated. I was a woman with money, a company, and had just bought the mansion across the street from my in-laws, so in many people's eyes, the image of a daughter-in-law using power to oppress her mother-in-law seemed compelling enough for them to believe it without verification. Within a single morning, my company's phones rang incessantly. 2 partners demanded explanations, and a large client temporarily suspended our contract, fearing reputational damage. My communications staff urged me to immediately appear publicly, disclose the audio recordings, and all evidence to refute the claims. I refused. I told them, "We will not chase every false accusation and argue on social media. Original data, financial records, and complete visual evidence must be handed over to the competent authorities. The truth doesn't need to be shouted, but it must be presented in the right forum." Ethan was restless, pacing constantly in the living room, his arm still in a sling from the shoulder injury the day before. "If we stay silent, people will believe her. Your company is losing money every hour." I replied, "I'm not silent. I'm just not turning a serious matter into a public squabble. Vivian wants us to lose our temper, say something wrong, and then she'll use those very words against us." Just then, Brenda came over from across the street. She was no longer wearing elaborate makeup, nor did she carry a purse or jewelry as usual. Her face was haggard, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. She sat down in front of me, her hands on her knees, and said, "I will speak up." Ethan immediately objected. "Mom, you're already being criticized by the whole family. If you come forward now, they'll turn around and scold you for aiding your daughter-in-law." Brenda looked at her son, her voice slow but firm. "All my life, I've feared what outsiders would say, which caused suffering to those within my home. Now, no matter what others say, I must speak the truth, just this once." Her words silenced the room. I didn't stop her, but insisted that everything be done in an official meeting, with lawyers, community representatives, and all relevant parties present. I didn't want her to speak emotionally, and then have her words manipulated again. The meeting took place that same afternoon in the community center's main hall. Besides my family, local authorities, lawyers, some neighbors who witnessed the event, and a few relatives who had received the fake audio clip were present. Brenda stood before everyone. Initially, her voice trembled, but as she spoke, it grew clearer. She admitted that she had demanded $7,500 from me monthly, invited relatives to pressure me, and had viewed my money as a way to clear her own debts. She said, "I used to think that because my daughter-in-law was well off, she had to bear the burden for her husband's family. I even used filial piety to force my son into silence. That was wrong. Chloe never tried to seize my house. On the contrary, when she learned my husband's documents showed signs of forgery, she was the first to say his legal assets must be protected." A relative asked if she was being forced to speak by me. Brenda looked directly at that person. "No one is forcing me. The ones who pressured me all along were my own pride and Vivian's sweet talk." That confession was like a scissor cut, severing the entire narrative Vivian had constructed. Those who had vocally criticized me began to fall silent. Some proactively asked to see the original video footage from the diner and realized they had been misled. Daisy later surrendered all her messages, secondary account statements, and the automatically saved audio recording. She also admitted to lending her brother's signature sample, loaning her laptop, and using some financial documents for improper purposes. Daisy turned to me, her voice choked with emotion. "Chloe, can you help me get out of this?" I looked at her and replied directly, "I will hire a lawyer to protect your legal rights, but I will not erase your mistakes. Making amends doesn't mean escaping consequences. You must pay your due. Then you can live honestly again." Daisy lowered her head and nodded slightly. This time, she didn't cry or beg for someone else to bear her burden. Ethan also made his decision. He would withdraw all his savings, sell his personal car, and use his work bonuses to cover the legal obligations his family had to bear. He told his mother, "I'm helping because you are my mother, but I will not use Chloe's money to cover something she didn't cause. If I did that, I would again be turning my wife into someone who bears the consequences for us." Arthur, after reviewing all the finances, also decided to sell the small rental property. He wanted to use that money to pay off the part of the debt that was truly his and Brenda's responsibility, and at the same time, end their lifestyle of holding on to a large house just to prove they were better off than others. I knew that if all assets were sold quickly, Arthur's legitimate share of the property might be bought by others at a low price. Therefore, I worked with my lawyer to quietly acquire the assets at risk of being sold off cheaply through a transparent agreement. I did not put everything in my name, but rather created a plan to ensure Arthur and Brenda would still have stable housing after their obligations were settled. When Ethan learned about it, he asked me, "Why are you still helping? After everything Mom has done, you could completely ignore them." I replied, "I'm not saving their greed. I just don't want two people who have truly admitted their mistakes and taken responsibility to lose their home. Forgiveness is not paying off all their debts, but it also doesn't necessarily mean watching them hit rock bottom." Brenda subsequently voluntarily suggested moving out of the large house. She wanted to lease or manage the property in the most advantageous way to pay off the debt, while she and Arthur would live in a smaller, sufficiently functional house without needing to show off. She said, "I've lived half my life for others to look at. Now, I just want a normal place for Dad to rest, and I will pay my own debts." I agreed, but also set clear principles with Ethan. Our marital finances must be independent. All support for his parents needed to be discussed beforehand. No one was allowed to use the words filial piety, tears, or illness to force the other into a decision they disagreed with. Ethan accepted everything. He also proactively suggested we continue living separately in the mansion across the street to give our marriage space to heal and for his parents to learn to take responsibility for their own lives. I didn't immediately assume every crack was mended, but for the first time, after many upheavals, I saw everyone in the family paying their due, no longer shifting responsibility to others. And only then did a home once filled with impositions begin to have the chance to become a true family. About 4 months later, the case officially went to trial. I didn't go to court with a feeling of triumph or a desire to see anyone pay a heavy price. What I hoped for most was for the truth to be called by its proper name, so that innocent people would no longer live under false accusations, and guilty parties could no longer hide behind fabricated excuses. Throughout the trial, every audio recording, every message, every bank transaction, and all evidence seized at the workshop were systematically cross-referenced. The fake seals, forged signatures, loan agreements, the batches of undocumented cosmetics, they all matched the testimonies of those involved. Vivian finally lost her composure. The woman who had always presented herself with confidence, spouting lofty moral pronouncements, bowed her head before irrefutable evidence. She was held accountable for forgery, defamation, organizing illicit cosmetics trade, and numerous other violations. Leo also had to answer for illegal lending, property coercion, threatening borrowers, and participating in illicit transport. Those who once thought they could manipulate an entire family with greed and fear eventually faced the consequences of their own actions. What brought me the most relief was that my father-in-law's legal assets were finally protected. After the fraudulent powers of attorney were invalidated, his lawful ownership was fully restored. Seeing him reclaim the stack of documents he once thought lost forever, I saw the usually reserved man's eyes well up. He turned to me and said just one short sentence. "Thank you, Chloe. That was the first time since I entered that family that I felt genuine gratitude, unmixed with any pressure or calculation." Daisy also had to take responsibility for her actions. Because she proactively cooperated, voluntarily surrendered evidence, and actively worked to mitigate the damage, she received leniency. After everything concluded, Daisy no longer spoke of opening a store or getting rich quickly. She applied for a sales associate position at a small company. On her first day, she wore a simple white shirt, wore old shoes, and smiled at me. "I'm okay with starting over at the entry-level salary, Chloe. At least it's money I earned myself." I smiled back. Sometimes people aren't afraid to start from scratch. They're just afraid of never acknowledging where they went wrong. As for Brenda, she changed in a way that surprised many in the neighborhood. She no longer gathered to show off her children, her money, or her rich daughter-in-law as before. Each week, she attended the senior citizens club in the community. Once, I happened to pass by and overheard her recounting her own story to everyone. She didn't mention anyone's name. She just spoke of a mother who, out of pride, lost her son's trust. A mother who, swayed by sweet words, nearly tore her entire family apart. She concluded with a very gentle sentence: "Never think that your children's money is something you have a right to take. We raise our children to love them, not to prepare a safety net for ourselves when we face difficulties." Many elderly men and women sat in silence for a long time. I knew she was speaking to herself more than to others. One time, on the way home from the hospital, we coincidentally saw the car carrying Vivian pass by. Ethan lightly squeezed my hand. I expected Brenda to turn away or utter some reproaching words, but no. She just stood silently for a few seconds, then said very softly, "I let her greed lead me because I also had greed within me. She'll bear her share, and I will spend the rest of my life correcting my own." The car continued to roll. No one said anything further. Perhaps that was when all resentment truly ceased. Not because people forgot, but because they didn't want to live forever in bitterness. After that ordeal, Ethan changed every day. He no longer shied away from difficult conversations. Family finances were openly transparent. For every major or minor decision, he proactively sat down and discussed it with me. In the evenings, he joined me in the kitchen to cook dinner. On weekends, he took his parents for medical checkups or helped me tend to the small garden in front of our house. Once he laughed and said, "Before, I always thought silence maintained harmony. Now I know that sometimes silence can hurt the one you love the most." I didn't reply. I just put another piece of fish on his plate. Some forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It just needs the other person to truly change. Ethan and I still live in the mansion across the street, but it is no longer a house bought to defy anyone's contempt. It is simply our home. My in-laws still live in their old house. Every time Brenda wants to visit, she calls beforehand. "Chloe, can I come over for dinner with you too?" If I'm busy, she happily reschedules. If I agree, she brings a basket of vegetables, a few grapefruits, or a freshly cooked pot of soup. There are no more unannounced entries, no more commands, no more "Mom said so, so you must obey." One late autumn afternoon, the whole family gathered for dinner. Brenda took a thin envelope from her pocket and placed it in front of me. "I've saved up a little money. It's not much, but this is the first amount I've saved myself after paying off debt. I can't undo the hurt I've caused. I just want to start learning how to live without relying on your money." I opened the envelope. There were only a few $100s inside. I gently folded it back and pushed it towards her. "Mom, keep it for Dad's medication. What I need most isn't this money. What I need is for you to respect your children's boundaries from now on. For me, that's enough." Brenda nodded quietly, her eyes reddening. That dinner, there were no more lengthy apologies, only the gentle clinking of chopsticks and plates, and very ordinary conversations. Looking through the window, I saw the two houses across from each other under the late afternoon sun. The day I bought that mansion, many thought I wanted to win, but today, I understand the most valuable thing isn't the $4 million house, but the fact that I had the composure to walk away from where I was being hurt without turning into a person full of resentment. A strong person isn't someone who wins every argument, but someone who knows how to protect their boundaries, knows how to say no to what's wrong, yet is still compassionate enough to offer a path back to those who genuinely repent. Family has never been a place where the privileged must bear all the mistakes of others. Nor is family a place where filial piety is used to compel someone to remain silent in the face of wrong. A home is truly peaceful only when each person takes responsibility for their own life, respects each other's boundaries, and maintains kindness, even after the deepest wounds. That is what I gained after all the upheavals. And perhaps that is the most precious asset this marriage has brought me.